What's up, everybody? Welcome into the first regular season edition
Mm.
of the 2024-25 NBA season for SSPN Postgame. Unfortunately, the Spurs had a very heartbreaking loss in the final minutes of the game, but when we were down 21 in the first half, and especially kind of how the beginning of the third quarter played out, it kind of felt like it was going to be over in general until about the 3 minute mark of the third quarter when the Spurs cut into the lead just a little bit, played with a lot of intensity, a lot of heart in the end of that third quarter, and they continued that into the fourth quarter, cutting it all the way to 2 points with 17 seconds left, until unfortunately Fred VanVleet hit a dagger three to end this one. So there's a lot that we're going to dive into. But, I will say, Ethan, with the way that kind of the majority of the first three quarters went, I'm glad that we at least had a battle and a close game to talk about here tonight.
Yeah, there's definitely some positives to take away within the 20-point deficit that was the first 2.5 quarters of this game, primarily from that end of the third quarter and fourth quarter comeback that the Spurs were able to mount on the backs of some unlikely heroes, Jude. We can get into the details here in a second.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought your summary was very well rounded there, Jude.
Yes. Well, Ethan, I did take some quarter by quarter notes. I know we weren't doing that as much in the preseason because we were just kind of free flowing. And then obviously the recap that we did last Friday was kind of just a little bit more of, it wasn't a post game show. It was kind of a day removed, talking about our thoughts on that game that we saw against the Mavericks. So we kind of just talked about this one. But I feel like we can go by quarter if you want to tonight. Is that good with you?
Sure, let's do it.
And we will obviously, like you said, talk about a lot of the different guys that showed out tonight because there are some names that we've been criticizing for a while here that I think played pretty well tonight. But just starting out with the first quarter, I didn't have too much written down because it was such an ugly quarter, 29-15 for the Spurs. And here, while we're at it, let me go ahead and get up our stats so that we can have that on the screen so the people can see it. But ugly start on both sides of the floor. The Rockets were hitting a lot of open threes that we were kind of giving them with missed rotations. But there were some, there were some positives that I had written down. I had Sohan is still finishing better in late shot clock situations where he kind of has to ISO. I saw that once in the first quarter. There was a nice backdoor from Zach to Julian. It's nice to see kind of some of those passes with Zach near the top of the key. And there was also a really nice Stephon Castle, Jeremy Sohan pick and roll in the first quarter. But for the most part, again, Rockets hitting threes, very ugly start for us on both sides of the floor. And the other thing that I had written down was it was really kind of a turnover fest for the second group of Spurs that came on the floor in that first quarter.
Yeah, at the initial kind of run in this first quarter, the biggest note that I took away, Jude, was it looked like we were making a conscious effort to play through Chris Paul in pick and roll sets. Now, that wasn't exactly what you were saying, half court offense with scheming, like things that you would draw up on a whiteboard, but
Right.
there was definitely like an effort to get him the ball and let him be the primary facilitator in the half court. And it had some positives. I feel like it was best later in the game, more so than this first quarter. But I had a lot of the same takeaways as you. It was Chris Paul initiating the offense, Wemby getting into the post, being patient, passing out of double teams well, but really wasn't able to find his own shot. Defensive intensity seemed lessened in this game, at least in the beginning, than it was in the previous game. It picked up
Yes.
later with a lineup shift, but at least initially that wasn't the case. And there were just a few miscues defensively that were winding up with wide open threes from the Rockets, like you were saying, and give them credit. They were knocking them down. But when you let guys like Jalen Green get hot early and let him continue to play at the level that he was, it makes it really difficult to overcome that deficit. And then I also wrote down the bench unit struggled to score initially, and that's when Houston really went on their run. And then I wrote down Houston is playing defense in all caps. They had a lot more intensity, a lot more physicality on ball handlers. They're picking up CP3 at the half court mark, if not full court, and really pressuring us early in the offense, making it difficult to find a rhythm early on in this game.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't text you, but I was thinking about texting you in the first quarter was just that they had a lot more intensity than
Yeah.
us, just straight up. And the other thing that the broadcast team brought up that I didn't think about in the Saturday night game was the Rockets were coming off of a back to back in that one.
Hmm.
So I think they did have a lot more fresher legs to
Yeah.
start this one, which I think contributed to that intensity.
Couldn't agree more.
But moving on to the second quarter, I'll just go ahead and read off my notes and then you can kind of give your thoughts as well. Let me see exactly what the score of this one was. So, still the Rockets did win the second quarter 33-30, but still a much more competitive quarter overall. Um, we implemented a zone defense at the start of
Hmm.
the second quarter. I'm not exactly sure how long we kept it. Might have just been a few possessions. But at the beginning of the second quarter, kind of the Rockets' dominance continued. They were on a 13-2 run that kind of went back to the first quarter. Um, and again, as much as there were some things from CP3 where he was setting some things up, really overall, still our offense was pretty rough. We had some bailout buckets late in possessions. Malachi had one in the second quarter that was nice, but there wasn't a ton of cohesion or intention as much as we were able to get some buckets here or there. It was a 3-10 turnover difference as well midway through the second quarter. So that just kind of ties into some of the other stuff that we've talked about. A lot of wasted possessions there. I mean, think about it, 3-10. 7 times 2, this is oversimplifying it, but
Yeah.
7 times 2 is 14 points. That's about around what we were down. That's still significant. There were a lot of plays, there are not a lot, but a couple plays in the second quarter from CP3 and Zach. And when I opened this up and I talking about guys that we've been criticizing, for a while, Malachi and Zach are probably the two at the top of the list. And this was one of the better games that I've seen from Zach in a while. It seems like we didn't play him as much in the second half. That was probably just because we'd rather have Wemby on the floor. But from what I saw from Zach tonight, this was one of the more favorable games that I feel like I've seen from him in a long time. And he was doing some good things in the second quarter. There were some big answers from CP3. CP3 actually had some intention and was looking to score. Not saying that should always be his role, but when he did that, that was kind of huge to help us kind of answer some of the Jalen Green threes. There were some threes that he answered
Hmm.
right back with. Again, we were leaving shooters open. Jalen Green continued to go off in the second quarter. That's probably where he scored most of his points, if I'm remembering the game correctly. But the other thing that really stood out in the second quarter was Jeremy Sohan. He was just fighting he was all over the boards, all over the offensive glass, getting some buckets tonight as well. But I'll wrap it up there because I could read off all of my little notes. But what are some takeaways that you had in the second quarter?
A lot of the same ones, but to go on what you just said about Jeremy, the note that I wrote down was he is making great decisions. And that's also something that Sean harped on as the game progressed, was that he was ripping through at the right time. He was making the right pass. He wasn't overcomplicating his offense. And that's how you get stat line of 22, 9, and 4 assists and only 2 turnovers. As well as 1 block. He was really great defensively and offensively, played with great intensity, and was in the right place at the right time. And that really started in the second quarter for him, like you mentioned. Other big notes that I wrote, like you said, CP and Zach working very well together. And I would agree this is definitely Zach Collins' best game thus far as a Spur. Still not without blemishes. I think he had a
Right.
couple fouls that were like, come on, Zach, what are you doing? He did finish with 11 points, 3 rebounds, 3 of 4 from the field, and hit 1 3. And we even ran a hammer action for him into the
Right.
corner where he missed that 3. But that was surprising. That was in this quarter as well. But I think we'll see maybe some more Zach Collins, Chris Paul minutes together, because that's kind of a traditional role man for him. And say what you will about Zach Collins, he makes high IQ passes and high IQ plays out of pick and roll. He's not great on defense. He, like we said, we could go all in about his negatives, but that part of his game is definitely good. Let me see. Outside of that, Jalen Green has to be denied the ball. I said there are positives going into the second half, but we cannot let him get the ball in space and shoot at will.
Yeah. Um, He got left open way too many times. I think it was just because of missed rotations. What would your diagnosis on why we left him open so much? Because Million Canoe is in the comments asking.
Yeah, I think it was really a matchup thing, and then just overhelping on Şengün and some of the bigs.
Yeah,
And then when you overhelp, we get lost in transition. I did have another note that I didn't read. It just felt like we were half a second, if not a full second, behind on rotations for most of this game. So it looked like we were kind of discombobulated, chasing after guys on the 3 point line, and that's when they were getting easy pull up jumpers in the mid range, or just getting easy layups at the rim. Because we were overreacting to them being open from three. And like I said, give them credit. They were making some tough shots too.
yeah,
And there's some of those things that we just can't account for, and it's not
right.
completely our fault. But that we definitely could have been better rotationally tonight in that regard. But I also wanted to mention this that I didn't mention before in this second quarter. And I think it's something that we've seen from Wemby, even going back to last year, but I've really noted it, especially the Mavericks game that I was at. When teams are physical with him and make him uncomfortable early, he starts to overcompensate and overcomplicate his offensive game. He's
Yeah,
dribbling too much, and this happened early in the second quarter. He was dribbling a little bit too much, spinning into double teams, losing the ball low, and really like where he could have just taken a fadeaway jump shot, one dribble, maybe two
hmm
dribbles. He was spinning back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We lose the ball, or he wastes 5 seconds of the shot clock. Inevitably, has to pass it out. So I think that's something that will be addressed as he gets more into his like the speed of the game and remove some of the rust and builds up his stamina again. But it's just something to keep note of as teams continue to be physical with him in his second season.
Yeah, and when you talked about the rotations and us kind of being a half second late,
Yep.
again, not to make complete excuses here, but I really think that again ties into the intensity point, which I think ties into the back to back point. Like the Rockets might not had as much leg under them that they had on Saturday or
Hmm.
than they had tonight, if that makes sense. So I think maybe because of the difference between that game and this one, maybe that could be a reason there. But it also could just be that we were a little bit lackadaisical as well after getting
Right.
the win.
That also could be a good point.
Right. But in the third quarter, after that, we did find a way to pull out a win,
Hmm.
30-25. And the interesting thing about that is when I look back on the third quarter, like I kind of said when I opened this up, the quarter in its entirety isn't that pretty. There were some positive things that we saw at the beginning. You and I were texting about
Hmm.
that, but really the middle kind of it flipped back to where it was. We cut it to 12 twice, and then the Rockets would go back up 16. But in those final 3 minutes, man, Stephon Castle was on the floor. Um,
Blake Wesley.
Blake Wesley, and it was. I'm so glad you said that because I think one of the things I have written down here yes, implementing ball pressure with Castle and Blake in. That's really what initiated that little run that we had at the end of the third quarter. And Jacob Toby and Sean Elliott were talking about it, and they were talking about how Pop has talked about how he really likes the defense from those two when they're on the floor. I was
Hmm.
like, that sounds just like my friend Ethan Quintero. He says the same thing. And that really is kind of what helped kickstart the run. And the fact that we were able to do that with our bench, with the way that they had played earlier in the game, that really showed me a lot. Yes, we want to finish these type of games. We don't want to have the same story as last year. But I also don't think I think there's context to things. Like we went down 21. If we don't go down 21 and have that rough start, we start. And I know it's easy to say, well, if we do what we did in the second half in the first half, then it's better.
Hmm.
But like genuinely, if it's not a turnover fest, you know what I mean? Then that changes things. You want to give the Rockets some credit there, especially with the shots they were hitting in the first half.
Yeah,
But a lot of those turnovers were just completely on us. And so I think if we clean that up, we're not in that hole in the first place. And then this second half wins us the game. Again, there, shoulda, woulda, coulda. It's a what if type scenario, but I think you get what I'm saying there.
for sure. Like if you look at just like the full scores by quarter, this looks like a last year game or the year
Right.
before. How many games did we have where we had 10 points in the first quarter and then we played really well the rest of the game? Or vice versa. Really good for the first three quarters and then awful in the fourth quarter. Like it just feels like one of those games. And I guess the only caveat I have is I feel more comfortable in the things that we've learned in this loss moving forward than I did in years previous
That's
because of guys.
exactly how I felt.
Yeah, because of guys like Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, who didn't have a great game. We can talk about it later, and the young talent that we saw in the third quarter, and that young backcourt pressuring the ball, like you were saying, and then Devin Vassell returning as well. But yeah, just to speak on Blake Wesley and Stephon Castle, that young backcourt that we saw kind of propel the momentum in the Spurs' favor at the end of the third quarter. That's exactly what we needed. And not to pat myself on the back, but I was thinking at halftime, I was like, we just need a spark. And the spark, I think, is that backcourt and Malachi Branham, because
Yes.
we were really struggling to score. And he came in and immediately hit 2 threes. Tough threes, too.
I
Pump
can't
fake,
believe I didn't
sidestep
mention
threes.
him.
No, you're totally fine. And that lineup, just in case anyone didn't watch the game, was Blake Wesley, Stephon Castle, Malachi Branham, Keldon Johnson, and Victor Wembanyama that led that comeback. And that is a lot of youthful energy. And they were playing with tempo. They were playing with intensity, things that we were not doing in the first 2.5 quarters of this game. And they had the Rockets on their heels, and we were able to go on a run. So they absolutely need a shout out. Keldon Johnson had an and one. He had a post up opportunity that he took advantage of. Wemby was grabbing missed free throws and it was leading to a Malachi three. I think that was his third three. He had three threes
Mhm.
in this quarter, 9 points. And we were down 12 going into the fourth quarter, but we had all the momentum on our side, which
Yeah.
obviously led to the eventful ending of this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was mentioning that third quarter, the fact I didn't mention Malachi Branham, like I
Yep.
said earlier, I mean, the thing that the reason it was even more impressive for me is because a lot of those turnovers in the first half that we were referencing, a lot of them were from Malachi. It was a
Yep.
rough start for him. So the fact that he stayed mentally strong and then came in and made those shots, it's one game. We're going to see how the rest of the season progresses, but that was a moment, I think, of mental growth for him. The fact that he stayed locked in, after the first half went the way that it did, on top of the fact that the timing was just huge as well. I can't say enough about the way that he finished the game. That was really huge. I'll just read off some of my other notes here before we get to the fourth, and I'll let you start the fourth on
Okay.
this next one. But we crashed the offensive glass a lot early in the quarter. You saw a lot more from Jeremy's post control. Man, it's nice to see his offense develop.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we cut it to 12 twice, and the Rockets kept answering. But again, we stayed in it, kept fighting, even in those last 3 minutes. And the thing that I was thinking is, if I was in the Rockets' position in the last 3 minutes, Ethan, it would be like, okay, we're kind of putting them away. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was like, okay, there's still a little bit of a chance. So I think when they let up a little, we kind of capitalized on that moment and realized that, okay, hey, we can maybe catch them by surprise here. If we really lock in for these next 3 minutes, we might be able to make this a game. Um, and that's exactly what they did. And it's so funny because before I started writing all this other stuff after the Castle and Blake ball pressure, the first thing I had written down was, I like the effort that we're still giving down 20. Stephon got a nice steal that kind of jump started it. Then we were able to cut it to 15. And again, even when we cut it to 15, another three from Fred VanVleet in the third quarter. But after that, offensive boards, the Malachi surge. And yeah, man, just we made so much out of that. Those 3 minutes, I think, are what won us the game. Like you said, that propelled us in, or not won us the game, but kept us in the game. Excuse me, we lost. But that was huge. That was just so huge to
Right.
propel us into the fourth quarter. What did you see there?
No, I completely agree with everything that you just said. And Malachi Branham, I don't think he is the answer necessarily. I don't want to overreact to one solid game when he's played pretty poorly in the preseason and the other two regular season games. However, something we didn't consider, Jude, really was Mamu Kelashvili not playing at all. Keldon
Hmm.
Johnson being more of a backup four with a mixture of other guys. And that kind of opens up, especially with Trey Jones' injury, that opens up a spot
Yeah.
at that three. And we didn't think about Malachi getting those minutes. We just kind of assumed it would be Mamu. But if that's going to be the case, this could be the type of game that kind of builds his confidence. Because if he
Yeah.
can continue to do this, take away those 3 turnovers he had early, this is exactly what we wanted from him. Just comfortable scoring off of that bench.
Yeah. I mean, that's all we've really wanted him to be.
Mhm.
It almost feels like since we drafted him,
Yeah.
being able to get those buckets. But the fact that again, this, what this ties into Ethan, and I know the preseason games, we talk about how we take those with a grain of salt. But one thing I'm seeing translate with Malachi is that it's the same thing. When he doesn't force it, he can be effective. And I know he did have some buckets in this game off the dribble, like that one that I referenced earlier in the second quarter that was clutch late in the shot clock. It's not that he doesn't have that ability, but that's a late shot clock situation. He has to go do that. He's not doing that at the beginning of the possession. When he lets the game come to him, he can be effective. So hopefully, like you said, especially in Trey Jones's absence,
Yes.
this is something that he can continue to build on. But just go into the fourth quarter. For my notes, the first thing I have written down is Malachi El Fuego, because he hit another three to start the quarter. We were creating turnovers on defense as
Mm-hmm.
well. Wemby took that charge on Alperen Şengün. There were some other missed passes. There was one that just kind of flew right past Amen Thompson out of bounds. It was so funny because when I was watching this, I was like, man, this feels like almost the game is in reverse.
It
And sure
was, yeah.
enough, right after I have that thought, Sean Elliott's like, man, this is like the start of the first half, but the other way around. And so, some of that, like you said, or like we said in the first half, was a little bit of carelessness from Houston. But again, the fact that we capitalized on it, kept fighting. And, the biggest thing for me, so at 91-86, we missed 3 straight threes, and then Pop called a timeout, which I really liked, because I was like, let's slow some things down here. But even when it was like, okay, it's dangling in the balance, we've given up opportunities. Again, we kept fighting to cut it to 2 on that Wemby fadeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, unfortunately, that open 3 on a missed rotation from Fred VanVleet was the dagger in us, and that was kind of symbolic of also what was the dagger in us in the first half. But the thing that I liked when I heard that was immediately Sean Elliott was like, oh, and Chris Paul's on him talking about it. That is the thing. Like when you mentioned earlier how you feel like this was a similar game to last year, but there's some things in it that also were different and give you a little bit more hope. That's some other things. Like I feel like we're learning a little bit more, and we're also making less mistakes overall. So yeah, there was also a really clutch shot from a really clutch block from Julian Champagny where he came in late to swat Alperen Şengün at the rim. The step back from Wemby that was a 3 was absolutely insane. That was super clutch. And the poster from Jeremy on
Yeah.
Şengün where he just drove inside, put his shoulder in him, and dunked on him. Man, that was great to see. The other and I can't even not mention this. CP3, just when you thought the game was like for sure over, CP3 hits an and 1-3 that turns into a flagrant, and then we also get the bucket on that possession. Again, Fred VanVleet 3 right after that. But again, that's just an example of you keep fighting, you keep playing, you never know what can happen. Because I thought for sure after the 2 Keldon misses that were a little tough, I thought it was, for sure over. And the one thing I'll say on those 2 Keldon misses, there was one near the rim that was like barely out. And immediately, you saw he knew like, oh man, I should have made this. And then the open 3 as well. In that one, I was like, okay, I would have liked to get it in Wemby's hands, honestly. But also in the circumstance where we need to score quick, I'm not mad at him with no hesitation, just taking the corner 3. I don't think that's him being selfish. I think that's him being like, okay, we need to score quick to have a chance in this game. I'm wide open. So it sucks that he didn't execute on those, but I also didn't hate those 2 looks. And again, because they kept playing and the clutch play from CP3, there was still a chance. So
Yeah, I have a lot of the same notes. Don't want to repeat everything that you said. Side note, at the beginning of the quarter, Blake Wesley did have a nice dunk around Alperen Şengün that you didn't mention. That was the first play of the game, right before Malachi's big 3 and Wemby's draw charge. Wemby also had a couple nice looks at the beginning of this quarter down low. One of them was a bank shot, just like off the block, classic Tim Duncan look. Love that from him when he just keeps it simple and doesn't overcomplicate things. Malachi cutting, like you said, letting the game come to him continues to be a spark as well. Steph Castle had a really nice take on Dylan
yeah.
Brooks. Really tough. Jalen Green did the exact same thing going the other way. So obviously defense continued to be an issue, especially stopping him. We had a bad possession out of a timeout right after Julian swatted Şengün. I think we gave up a wide open layup, and then we
Mhm.
just turn the ball over. And it's like, come on, guys. Like out of timeouts, we have to be better than that, especially late in games. CP, like you said, does still have the clutch gene, but he cannot overcome mistakes and bad plays late in games. Like I completely agree with you. The 2 threes that Keldon took, one off of a double team Wemby in the post and the right wing, totally fine with that shot. And then the last one, CP3 finding him in the corner, totally fine with that shot. Those are shots he has to take. Those are correct decisions, and they're open shots. He just missed them. I don't like the layup that he took really late in the game because that possession, Wemby didn't even touch the ball, didn't even smell it. I think Jeremy also had a similar play late in game.
Yeah.
Not super mad about the Jeremy one because he
Yeah.
really did have a good game aside from that. And Wemby didn't play all that well shooting the ball. 6 of 14, 1 of 5 from 3. He did have 20 boards, 4 blocks. Like obviously still
20?
a Wemby
That's
great
what it ended up being?
20 boards, yeah. Still a
Wow.
great Wemby game. But at the same time, last 4 minutes of the game, I pretty much want him touching the ball
Right.
every single possession, even if he's not going to shoot it. So those 2 plays hurt. I did see someone in the comments saying that we didn't attack Şengün after he got his 5th foul. Maybe I'm not remembering everything correctly, but I think we did. He did rest a long time after he got that 5th foul. And then when he came back in, the first play was, like you said, Jeremy putting his shoulder into him
Yeah.
and dunking because he knew he wasn't going to foul him. And then
Right.
when we got the switch that we wanted, which was Wemby on Şengün, Wemby took him off the dribble twice. One was a step back 3 that was super clutch, and the other one, Wemby lost his handle, and I think we turned the ball over or he just missed a shot. I can't remember which. But I think we went at him. Maybe we should have been more physical. I can agree with that. Got the ball down low to Wemby more often late in games. Completely agree with that. But I do think that we were attacking the fact that he couldn't get his 6th foul. Um, Let me see. Harrison Barnes did get subbed out late for Malachi Branham. I'm fine with that because of how well Malachi was playing. And honestly,
Mhm.
this was the first bad game we saw from Harrison Barnes.
Right.
0 for 3, 0 for 1 from 3. Granted, he wasn't getting the ball that often, but being a role player, you got to take advantage of the shots that are coming to you, and he just wasn't hitting them, and not the greatest impact otherwise in tonight's game. But I still like the effort that we had late. We almost were able to win it. A couple miracle plays from Chris Paul, like you said. But these are the games that we have to win, and this one we came up short. So,
Yeah. I think you pretty much summed it up as best as we can there. The fact that they fought back into it, you don't want to have the same story as last year. But there were still some good things, and especially when you consider a lot of the circumstances in the game, for sure.
mhm.
Man, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on the box score that stands out to me.
He lost the ball, Swatcho and Hanover
Oh,
fist.
I missed that.
Not trying to like criticize you guys either. I just like that's why he didn't attack the rim, is he just lost the ball. So it was his fault, but not for a lack of trying. He just mishandled it.
What are some of the overall things moving forward for this team going into this OKC and this Jazz back-to-back this week that you think could improve?
We can't come out flat. We can't come out flat, and we cannot be losing games because of a lack of intensity defensively. We are young. We're talking in media day. We're saying that's what we want to hang our hats on is defense. So we can't be lackadaisical on that end of the court. It has to be beginning to end, consistent level of focus.
You know what I think it still comes down to? Just playing a complete 4-quarter game.
Yeah.
We're still learning to do that. Intensity is definitely something we're going to have to do on Wednesday, man. We play the Thunder on ESPN. It's
Mm-hmm.
the first time we've played this. It's another rivalry, or played them this year. You're going to have to come out with intensity in that one. And then also it'll be the first back-to-back. So I'm going to be interested to see in the Jazz game, how they respond physically in the first back-to-back, both on the road as well. Our first 3 games to start the year have been at home. Man, I don't want to make it feel like the same story from last year. Cleaning up self-created turnovers, not the other team making plays, just, turnovers where we're giving up the ball ourselves with the team, the other team we're playing having nothing to do with it.
Yep.
Getting Wemby the ball in clutch situations.
Mm-hmm.
And again, playing with that same consistent intensity all, what is it, 48 minutes, right? I'm doing my math
48
right?
minutes, yes, sir.
All 48 minutes throughout the game. Um, yeah, and the other thing that I also want to continue to watch is Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham until Trey Jones comes back. That's another
Yes.
thing that is a big thing. And another last thing that I'll harp on is Jeremy Sohan. The way that he started the season, I believe he's had at least 17 points in every game, at least 6 rebounds in every game, and there are a lot of rebounds, that he may not get, but he's having a hand in helping get the rebound, whether that's, boxing somebody else out, getting a fingertip in there,
Mhm.
where it goes into Zach Collins' hands or somebody else. But I think through these first 3 games of the season, again, just 3 games, obviously we know who is the centerpiece of the franchise, but I think Jeremy Sohan would be the MVP for me in these first 3 games of the year.
I for sure agree. And if not MVP, let's throw back to original SSPN listeners, unsung hero,
There you go.
for sure. And I think more so than his points and just efficiency and lack of turnovers, it's his rebounding and defensive intensity that has taken a leap so far. I know only 3 games, but it's definitely improved. If you guys aren't watching these games and just looking at the box score, go watch the highlights of this one and just watch him even when he's not the primary ball handler or the primary focus.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say also to add to things, 30% from 3 from the floor
Mhm.
tonight. The Rockets were 40%
Yeah.
from 3 from the floor tonight. So that was also another big factor in this game.
Hmm.
But any final thoughts on this one before we go into OKC and Utah?
Thankfully, Hartenstein won't be playing for OKC.
Yeah.
He's still injured, and it's sad. But Taylor Hendricks just got really hurt tonight, so we don't have to worry about him. But that's
Yeah.
a tough one because that's a major injury.
Yeah, I have him on one of my fantasy teams, and obviously his health
Yeah,
and happiness is foremost over my fantasy team. But I didn't see that. I just saw that there were a lot of tweets saying it was really bad. So
it's
when I
really
see the
rough.
video, man, well, prayers to Taylor Hendricks, man, for
Right.
sure. And one last thing, Devin Vassell.
Coming back November.
That's another thing we've got to remember with all of these games. Our second best player is not playing. Not saying that's going to fix everything. And I know that, you still don't want to start like that. And, this is a what if scenario, but I think this is a game where Devin could have a real impact on winning.
Couldn't agree more.
We appreciate you guys so much for hanging out with us tonight. A little bit of a programming update. So, we will be doing a pregame live stream on Thursday before the Spurs play the Jazz in Utah. A little bit of the late night games. Me and Ethan still got to go to work, so we're not going to do post games for OKC and Utah. But what we will do is in that pregame stream, we're going to recap the OKC game on ESPN from Wednesday, and then we'll preview the Utah Jazz game and the Minnesota Timberwolves game this Saturday before we're back next week. So we hope to see you all there. We hope you guys are having a great start to your week. Go Spurs, go. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe below if you want to stay updated with the show. Turn on the notification bell, go to the community tab, or follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero.